John Fugelsang is a comedian, host of Tell Me Everything on SiriusXM Insight, and a good buddy of mine. John, it took a while, but we've got you on the show.
Thank you very much, Dave. It's a pleasure to be back on your show.
We really should have recorded what happened for these last 6 or 8 minutes because we had...
I think it's pretty good for your viewers you didn't record what just happened.
We had a little miscommunication whether we were doing this at 11:30 a.m. or p.m. Long story short, we just followed you as you ran across the SiriusXM hallway with your laptop screaming like a crazy person.
Well, the good news is my evening is now free. I thought we were taping. I thought you were taping at 5:30 p.m. your time, or 8:30 p.m. your time. So I apologize for the poor grasp of the details. But my defense is that I went to public school. Thank you.
I'm bringing you on to defend liberalism, to defend the left, and we've already had a time problem, which has set us up here. But first, before we get into anything, so you are at SiriusXM, that's where your show is. You actually tape your show out of my old studio. Is that correct?
Oh, no, it's not. When I first met you, it was a very different studio, and I was doing it from, they just moved us to another one, and they're remodeling here. So, but many times I have done pre-tape interviews in your old studio, and I always think of you, and I always scour the room for, narcotics you might have left behind.
Do you dedicate each show to me? I hope so.
In my heart, I do, Dave. In my heart, I do.
All right. Well, let's get to it here because you are one of my favorite comics. You're actually one of the only guys that can drag me to do stand-up. Pretty much the only time I do stand-up these days is when you say, all right, I'm in town and I'm doing one of my shows, and you do these great Comedy Nation shows that are mostly about politics and free speech and religion. I mean, all the things that I like talking about. So before we get into comedy, let's just talk about your history because you have an incredible upbringing, your parents' background. Go. Fugelsang 101. Let's go.
Oh, my. Where to begin?
Start at the beginning.
I'm an actor. I'm a stand-up. I'm a broadcaster. I come from a curiously Catholic background. My parents are both former Catholic clergy members, my father being a Franciscan brother, my mother being a nun who spent many years as a nurse working with lepers in the jungles of Malawi, Africa. With a background like that, I could never afford the therapy I actually needed, so I got into theater and stand-up. And over the course of my career, I've hosted adult literacy shows for PBS. I've been murdered on CSI. I've gotten Drama League nominations for off-Broadway solo shows. I've worked on MSNBC, Fox News, and CNN. I hosted my own program for the late lamented Current channel. I once got Mitt Romney's advisor to call Mitt an Etch-a-Sketch. And I once got George Harrison to play his final on-camera performance. And I hosted America's Funniest Home Videos with Daisy Fuentes. So yeah, it's a pretty schizophrenic resume, but that's kind of how.
Not many people can say they replaced Bob Saget, but you did.
Oh, I could never replace Bob Saget, and even his wife agreed with that. But I was happy to take over for the show for a little. It was only going to be for like 6 weeks, and it wound up being a year and a half. So it was a fun little gig, and it taught me that that wasn't what I needed to do.
Yeah, so I like doing a little bit of the pedigree stuff because it's important to know, I feel like there's so many talking heads and nobody knows what their backgrounds are, what they studied, where they came from. And it's nice knowing that, so this religious upbringing that you had, when did you sort of realize, as you said, you couldn't afford therapy, so you went into acting and comedy. When did you realize that maybe some of the constructs of religion weren't for you?
That's a great question because I think that we, one thing that we don't talk about too much is the separation of church and faith. The fact that religion and belief are two completely different things. And religion is a culture of middlemen, whereas faith is just between the believer and the deity of their choice. I always had problems with religion, even when I was devout. And it wasn't until I went to college in NYU at the NYU Catholic Center, and it was a very progressive community. I was actually asked to help teach a course for converts along with the pastor. And it was a church that welcomed gay people openly. And I remember bringing my parents to the church I went to in college, and they were so inspired by seeing how gay couples were welcomed and loved. This is in the 80s. That kind of made me realize, well, that's not the usual policy for this unauthorized fan club of Jesus. And, the more it was really when I saw my dad give a lecture at a college once about Martin Luther and the Reformation, and I was like, why are we Catholic? Why aren't we Lutheran? These are all the critiques you have of the Pope. And so that was what really made me be not a Catholic. I still consider the Catholic Church to be my asexual orientation. But over the years, I found the farther I got away from organized religion, the more interested in theology and faith I got. And so now I get to alienate everybody because half of them are an atheist and half of them think I'm a cult member.
Right. So you're making a really interesting distinction there. So you're not into organized religion as it stands, but you are a believer, correct?
Yeah, I'm a believer, sure. But I don't think God's an invisible man with a beard and a penis in the sky who throws down lightning bolts when he's in a moody situation. You read the Old Testament, it's like the alcoholic stepgod. And, and it's like this big cosmic game of candid camera and God's Alan Funt. So yeah, I make a distinction. I was asked to go on Kamau Bell's show and debate Jamie Kilstein about atheism versus belief. And I was like, well, I'll never tell an atheist they're wrong. My definition of faith doesn't involve telling other people that they're wrong. When I got to the studio, they wanted me to defend religion. And I'm like, no.
Right.
I'll defend anyone's right to worship, and as long as you're not bothering anybody else's person or property or putting somebody down in the name of Jesus, then good for you. God bless. Find the fan club that works for you. But I'm not going to defend religion. I'm going to defend faith and belief. And they were like, well, no, don't do that. Just. I said, I'm sorry, I can't. And so Jamie and I just told jokes, and it got 1 million hits on YouTube because I think people are really tired of the whole "my God can beat up your God" thing. Some of the best Christians I know are atheists. Some of the most godless heathens I know are Christians.
Right.
And even atheists can go crazy, you know? I mean,
Sure.
There's fundamentalist atheists. I mean, I love the Atheist Handbook. It's a great set of rules for people who are tired of religion's set of rules.
Yeah.
For me, it's like, you know, my faith is such that you believe what you want to believe if it makes you a better person. The Dalai Lama said the purpose of religion is to improve yourself, not criticize others. And that's kind of where I come from. Although I do enjoy mocking hypocrites.
Right.
And that's
So
sort of been my thing.
yeah, you love mocking hypocrites, and that's a lot about, you know, what your stand-up's about. And when I see you going back and forth with people on Twitter, hypocrisy, and that's the main thing usually that comedians call out. So when it comes to faith, so your faith to you, I sense, is just something private. You're not even defining what your faith is, really, right?
No, I'm not. I mean, if anyone wants to talk to me about it, I will. But generally, my faith is such that I don't pretend to know all the answers. And they often say the opposite of faith is doubt. I think that's rubbish. I think doubt is an integral part of faith. The opposite of faith is certainty. And I trust anybody who's searching for the truth. I generally don't trust people who claim they have it.
Right. So it's interesting because me and you were sort of splitting hairs on this. I would say I'm not a believer. I wouldn't believe in something without evidence. But that said, I don't mind. I know a lot of atheists don't like religious people or think that they're really just diluted or whatever it is. And to me, I would go with sort of what you just said, which is I don't mind if someone's religious because I won't pretend to be more moral than anyone or living somehow a better life than anyone else. I just don't want them pushing it on me or beheading me or throwing gays off roofs.
Yeah, I don't want them using their personal faith as an excuse to put somebody else down. And that's something I take very seriously. There's no part of the Bible you can ever use to justify discrimination against LGBT people. And I have this debate not infrequently. Again, there's no part of the Bible anyone can honestly use to justify any sort of discrimination. And when you're starting to use Jesus, when you're starting to use Christianity as a cloaking device for douchebaggery, that's when I have to call you out. Again, I've known wonderful conservative religious people. I think that very often conservative Christians can be more liberal with kindness than lots of liberals. You'll find a lot more liberality of warmth and love at certain, Baptist meetings than you'll find at Upper East Side cocktail parties. So, but for me, I'm in love with the mystery.
Yeah.
And my definition of God does not involve a man with a penis. And, I think that the Bible, the main character of the Bible, Jesus, is a guy who spoke in parable and metaphor. I don't know why it's so hard to read the Bible as parable and metaphor. There's a lot of truth in the Bible, not necessarily a lot of facts.
Yeah. All right, I feel good about our start here. We sort of see this a little bit differently, but I respect where you're coming from. And that's sort of what both of us.
Yeah, I just want to be vague enough to sucker people into my cult.
No, you're quite good at it. And by wearing all black and with the long hair, the whole thing's very effective.
Thank you very much. I've got a beautiful compound, and I want to invite all of your viewers down. You'll have to turn over some account numbers and wear robes, but it's really a great faith community. I think you'll love what we do there.
Yeah. Well, we'll put the link in the description down below. Don't worry about that. Okay, so let's shift a little bit to comedy before we jump right into politics. So when did you really decide, okay, I've got something to say and people need to hear it? Because that's a crazy thing for a person to do, and I say that as someone that has done stand-up for a long time.
Well, I don't know if anyone needs to hear anything I do. I never really felt that. I just knew that the first time I saw George Carlin live, he made me feel less alone. And I knew I wanted to do what he did. I wanted to come out and rail against injustice and nonsense and lies, but I didn't want to just be a propagandist. I wanted to do it creatively. I wanted to find ways to be funny and make it entertaining. And I've always tried to adhere to a principle of entertaining first, informative second, and preachy last, which is easier on stage than it is on Twitter.
Sure.
But I've always, Carlin was really it for me. I was a fan of his before I saw him live. But once I saw him live, I knew that that's what I wanted to do. And I so admired how he went after politicians and religious leaders and just creeps in general, and did it using humor rather than hate or just propaganda. And so for me, I love doing stand-up that's just silly and nonsense. But I also really love to work out logic through penis jokes. That's my morality.
Yeah, well, to me, the real beauty of Carlin was that he was the most political you could possibly be, and yet at the same time, very rarely commented on politics of the day. You know what I mean? Like right now, if he was alive, I don't think he would be commenting that much on the racehorse that we're all caught in of, the Trump, Hillary, Bernie, this, that, the other thing. But he would be commenting on the bigger pieces of it. And you kind of take the same approach.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, he spoke extensively about the Reagan administration. He talked a lot about Clinton versus Dole. I mean, if you listen to the albums from the 80s, What Am I Doing in New Jersey? And then, of course, I think Jammin' in New York is his best album, and Back in Town, the one that followed it, is almost as good. I think he would have flip-flopped the two. But even like You Are All Diseased was an album where he talked about Bush and he talked a lot about supporting Governor Bush after 9/11, even though he didn't like him. He would only call him Governor Bush. I mean, Carlin, right. He didn't make his whole sets about it, but he more or less took on the inner douchebag in all of us. And politicians were very often the starting point for him to jump off into just social hypocrisy that the politicians are just figureheads of. So he did single out, and Clinton he went off on a lot. I once saw him in Vegas, where he was just railing against the Bush family and just said, I hope the whole family dies in an airplane fire. And people were walking out in droves. But it was a pleasure to watch him work out his material that way and separate the anger from the humor and separate the anger from the outrage, because anger doesn't work in comedy, but outrage does.
Right. You got to get right to that line and toe it properly. And then you can tell some people the truth, because if you're telling the truth and you're being funny, that's good. But if you're telling the truth and you're not, that's when the pitchforks come.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Billy Wilder said it, Dave. Billy Wilder said, if you're going to tell people the truth, make it funny or they'll kill you. And I keep that quote around.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so let's jump into some political stuff. You are a through and through liberal. You're one of my left friends that I still understand. A lot of what I've been doing on the show, I've lost a lot of my people on the left, but I consider you a good liberal. Do you consider yourself a liberal? Does that have any meaning to you anymore, the words?
I don't know, to tell you the truth. I mean, 10 years ago, I got called a liberal because I supported gay marriage. I supported decriminalizing marijuana. I thought Bush's economic plans weren't going to work, and I was against the Iraq War. It turns out I wasn't a liberal. I was prematurely mainstream.
Right.
And throughout history, I think prematurely mainstream is what liberals have been. They've been the ones who fight for social change, generally. But, everyone I know, every interesting person I know is liberal in some areas and conservative in others. If you're all just one or the other thing, it doesn't mean anything. You become a guy at a Star Trek convention. So I I get asked this question, and I don't really know what liberal means anymore, but when I read the dictionary definition of the word, I aspire to be that. Like I was on this show on Fox News, and they kept trying to get me to admit I was a liberal, and I said I aspire to be a liberal the same way I aspire to be a Christian. I don't know if I would ever self-identify as either of those two words.
Yeah, well, I love that. And you weren't connected to us on Skype when I did the intro to the show, but I actually took the literal definition, the dictionary definition of liberal, and I read it out. And it's someone who's basically, if your ideas are evolving, if you're willing to challenge the status quo, then you are a liberal.
Yeah.
And it's so funny to me. I remember back in 1992 when I was 12 years old and we were doing a mock election when Dukakis was running against George H.W. Bush, and George...
88, I think.
What's that?
That was 88.
I'm sorry, that was 88. That was 88. 92 was Clinton. And George H.W. said, "You're a liberal," and Dukakis said, "I'm not a liberal." And that was the Democrat, because liberal was a dirty word back then.
Yeah,
so
I
it's
give
crazy.
you credit for that. I mean, by the end of that campaign, Dukakis finally said, "Yes, I'm a liberal in the tradition of JFK and all that." And Bush celebrated and said, "Wonder of wonders." He finally admits it. And I give Bush credit for making a word that means empathetic and open-minded and caring about the least of us. A word that pretty much sums up Jesus, if you go by the dictionary definition. And Bush Sr., I think, gets the most credit for turning it into a dirty word. I mean, there's no way you can say that Jesus wasn't a liberal if you go by the dictionary definition of the term.
Yeah.
And he certainly, they didn't, the state didn't put him to death, and the conservative religious bosses of their day didn't put him to death because he didn't rock the boat enough.
Right. He did not want change, right? This is a guy who wanted some change. Exactly.
Yeah, but by that same token, that definition you bring up, it's the greatest proof that we don't have a liberal media. Our friends on the right are fond of saying it's a liberal media, and I've just been like, well, this year has proven if the media was liberal. I mean, for a while, we've known if they were liberal, they'd probably cover an anti-war rally as much as they cover a Tea Party event. But if the media was liberal, I think they would have given Bernie Sanders a bit more than 1/80th the airtime they've given Donald Trump. The media is profit-driven. There are a lot of liberals who work in the media, but the media itself is ratings-driven. It's profit-driven. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That's just how it is. And a lot of liberals and conservatives can't admit that.
Right. So I love that you made that point, because, yes, it's profit-driven and people want clicks and people want views. We all understand that. I don't know what a better model would be. I don't know that the government coming in and saying everyone should have exactly equal time. I don't know that that really makes sense. I'm not a huge government guy, so I don't really love that. And at the end of the day, if more people are watching Trump and he's just using the system, it's kind of shitty, but it's sort of where we're at. Like, what else can we do?
We could restore the fairness doctrine. We could have more than one PBS, and we could have a PBS for liberals and a PBS for conservatives. I think we could have presidential debates every week on PBS. Where it's not about profit. I don't resent a corporate media from having to be responsible to their shareholders. That's just how the culture and the industry has evolved. Once you can admit that, Donald Trump seems to think that all this ratings and all this airtime mean people love him. What Trump, and I think a lot of folks in the media haven't realized, is a lot of these ratings that Trump generates is because a large number of people are actually hate watching him. He is the True Detective season 2 of politics. And a lot of people just keep on watching, to see how horrible he is, the way you slow down for a car wreck. I don't think that necessarily translates into love.
I stopped watching True Detective season 2 after one episode. Unfortunately, the country hasn't quite caught up to me on that.
And I stay to the bitter end like a Kennedy wife. And let me tell you, I'll never get those 10 hours back. But, I do think that MSNBC is doing great in their ratings now, but I think it may be because people are just fascinated that this Trump thing is actually happening. I mean, as a novelty act, historically, it's never happened before. It'll probably never happen again. And so in that sense, I think it's newsworthy in much the same way I think the Malaysian plane going missing or the OJ case was newsworthy. These are things that have never happened before. And I really begrudge the population for leaning in to watch a spectacle that our grandparents couldn't have imagined.
Yeah. So isn't it a little bit of both with Trump, though? Because there's obviously the spectacle and the sort of carnival atmosphere and all that. But at the same time, I read the other day that I think at this point he has more votes than any other Republican in the primaries, or at least he's going to certainly break Romney's record or George W. Bush's record by
Reagan.
the time California runs around. I think it's more than Reagan already. Now, part of that is just demographics change and all that kind of stuff. But the point is that people are actually voting for him. It's not just the
he's
media
at
thing.
51% now, approval of the GOP. That means, Dave, that Donald Trump is so popular, he's got 50% of 28% of the American population.
Right.
I believe Hillary and Bernie combined have gotten more votes than Trump.